My name is Mallory and I'm 36. At a New Year's Day brunch in Philadelphia, the room buzzed with that polite, staged noise families make when they want everything to seem fine. I was halfway through my plate when a small shadow eased up beside my chair, calm and intentional, like this had been rehearsed. A child's hand tipped a half-eaten plate and warm leftovers spilled onto my food right in the center like I was a trash can someone forgot to empty. Then she looked at me and said, "Mom says you're family trash." I didn't react. I didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even scan the room to see who was watching because I already knew they were. I just stared at the mess on my plate and felt something inside me shut off. The kind of quiet that doesn't come with tears, it comes with resolve. That night, after everyone went home and the group chat went silent for a bit, my phone lit up with a message from Mom. "You're out of our lives." 2 people reacted to it instantly. Fast and casual, like tapping a screen was easier than meeting my eyes. I smiled at my phone and typed one line. "Fine. Everything in my name disappears tomorrow." Then I left the group. By midnight, the messages wouldn't stop, frantic and broken, like someone had yanked the cord and they were only just noticing the quiet. "Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked away, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious how far this story will go." Back in my apartment that night, the silence felt heavier than the walls. I set my phone face down on the counter and left it there, buzzing against the laminate like it belonged to someone else. Muscle memory made me switch on the kitchen light, start the kettle, move through the same small motions I'd repeated for years. The only real change was in my chest. Something that used to fold automatically around other people's emergencies had finally gone rigid. My name is Mallory Caldwell. I am 36 years old, and if you looked at my life on paper, you would say I'm doing fine. I have a steady job in operations for a logistics company in South Philadelphia. A 1-bedroom walk-up I pay for on time, no kids, no pets, no partner to negotiate with. My credit score is the kind banks smile at. None of that is why my family needs me. They need my name. My younger sister, Desiree, is 3 years younger than me and has been the focal point of the Caldwell universe since she learned how to speak. My parents, Maureen and Philip, shaped their days around whatever she wanted, even when we were kids. Back then it was dance classes and new sneakers. Now it is a crossover she cannot afford, an image she cannot sustain, and a daughter of her own, Alana, who has been taught that the adults who fund her life do not include me. For more than 10 years, whenever someone in my family fell behind, the solution quietly ran through me. When my parents were months from losing their row house to back taxes and a second mortgage they barely understood, I took out a personal loan big enough to cover the worst of it. The monthly payment still leaves my account on the same day every month, a 4-figure sum pulled before I even see my paycheck. When Desiree wanted a safer, newer car for Alana, the dealership would not approve her a loan. So I signed as the primary on the lease. The payment pulls from my account automatically. The registration, the higher insurance rate, and the tolls from her weekend trips to the shore all land on cards in my name. When Maureen's part-time job stopped offering benefits, I added her to the health plan at my company. The premium comes out of my paycheck and the co-pays go on my card. When Philip's blood pressure prescription jumped in price, I told the pharmacy to keep his card on file under mine so he would not worry about it. Even Alana's after-school program, the coding club Desiree brags about to her friends, is billed directly to me. The monthly fee looks small when you stare at it by itself. It does not look small when you stack it next to the family phone plan, the internet that runs in my name, and the subscriptions everyone logs into from their living rooms while I eat leftovers over the sink. None of this was ever presented as a request. At first it sounded like praise. "You're so organized, Mel. You're good with money. We'd be lost without you." Those lines were the wrapping paper. Inside them sat the same assumption every time I would fix it because that is what I do. Over time the conversations stopped altogether. Bills simply drifted toward me. Notices got forwarded, logins changed hands, and somehow I became the person whose name was on everything important while being treated like a guest at every family gathering. Desiree's crises were handled like acts of nature. My overtime and side work were treated like background noise. I kept telling myself this was what adult daughters did. You step in when your parents falter. You carry your sister through the rough stretches until she steadies herself. You do not tally every compromise or wait for praise. You just keep moving because stopping feels like disloyalty. Standing in my cramped kitchen with the kettle screaming and my phone buzzing on the counter, it hit me that I could name every bill I covered for them, but could not recall the last time any of them asked what it was taking out of me. I know every due date and password tied to their comfort by memory. I can see the color of each company's logo when I shut my eyes, the way a nurse memorizes labels. What I do not have is a single clean page where all of it sits together. I have always dodged that, telling myself love does not belong in a spreadsheet. That family is not meant to feel like an account you balance. That night, for the first time, the lack of that page felt less like principle and more like avoidance. When the kettle shut itself off, I finally grabbed my phone. The screen was packed with alerts, stacked icons clawing for attention. The group chat sat near the top, frozen on my last line. I skipped past it and opened my banking app instead. The loading circle spun once, then my accounts filled the screen. Tidy and emotionless numbers that had always felt abstract now looked like something I could reclaim. I went straight to recurring payments. The list was longer than I care to admit. My own rent and utilities were at the top. Then came the rest. A loan tied to my parents' row house marked with their address but my name. A lease payment for a crossover registered to my sister. A charge for a health insurance plan with 3 dependents. A monthly fee for an after-school program labeled with Alana's name. A family phone plan with multiple lines. Home internet at an address that was not mine. Streaming services and other subscriptions all tied to my cards. For years I had scrolled past this screen without really seeing it. That night it looked different. Every line told a story about who was allowed to rest and who was not. Every deduction carried a trail of calls, tears, excuses, and that tight, performative gratitude that never turned into real thanks. I opened a new note and listed each obligation with the person who benefited beside it. The house loan, my parents; the car lease, my sister; the health plan, my parents again; the coding club, my niece; the phone lines, nearly everyone but me. I wrote the amounts out in words instead of numbers, forcing myself to feel their weight. 4 figures here, 3 figures there, strings of 2 figures that seemed harmless until they stacked into something massive. Once everything lived in one place, there was nothing left to debate. This was not a few favors. This was a second life I had been financing while intentionally keeping my own small. I began with the expenses that affected only them. The crossover payment did not have to stay on my shoulders. The company holding the lease had chat support. I asked how to remove myself as the primary payer and route the bills to the person actually driving the car. They were courteous but clear. They could not alter the contract. What they could do was stop withdrawing from my account and send each invoice directly to the address on file. I confirmed the update and watched the status change. The next draft would not come from me. Then I moved to the extra lines on my phone plan. In the account settings, each device was labeled. Mom, Dad, Des, Alana's tablet. Mine was the only one I actually needed. I checked the contract dates and compared the penalty for downsizing against another year of paying for 4 lines. The fee to cut them free was less than the cost of continuing. I scheduled the change for the next billing cycle. Their phones would not shut off overnight, but the notice would be sent. They would have time to transfer their numbers and learn what service costs when no one else is padding the bill. For the house loan payment, I left the agreement itself untouched and stopped only the automatic draft. The bank would issue a notice when the transfer failed to arrive. My parents would have to speak to the lender themselves instead of letting my balance cover their quiet. The after-school program was easy. There was a portal with a toggle for automatic billing. I turned it off. The site warned that future charges would need to be paid manually to keep enrollment active. A red banner stretched across the top of the page and stayed there even after I signed out. Health insurance needed more care. I could not drop my parents in the middle of a coverage period without giving them time to adjust. Inside my company portal, I read through the rules for changing dependents. There were enrollment windows, penalties for mid-year removals, and options for them to continue coverage on their own. I saved the relevant pages and decided that piece would not move tonight. By the time I closed the note, I had a map of every connection between my accounts and my relatives' comfort. Some changes were already in motion. Others waited on a call or a form. All of them were visible in a way they had never been before. My phone was still buzzing with messages I refused to read. I set it back on the table with the sound off and closed the laptop. The apartment was the same size it had always been, but my life no longer felt completely occupied. Just before midnight, the quiet in my apartment shifted. My phone kept lighting up on the table in short bursts. I let it flash a few times before turning it over. Notification banners stacked on the lock screen, most of them new threads where the group chat used to be. Above them sat 2 alerts from my bank, both marked important. I opened the bank messages first. The system had blocked a scheduled draft tied to the house loan after I removed the authorization earlier that evening. Another notice said a recurring charge for the car lease could not be processed and would need a new funding source. The wording was neutral, but the timing meant those alerts were landing in more than one inbox, not just mine. When I backed out to the home screen, the text threads came into focus. One from Desiree, one from Morin, one from Philip, and one from an unknown number. I opened my sister's first. Her messages stacked one after another. At first, Desiree wanted to know what was going on with the car payment and why her banking app showed the automatic draft as unavailable. Then her tone flipped into blame, demanding that I fix it immediately because I had signed the lease and because, as she wrote, my name was on everything. Every sentence carried the same expectation it always had. My role was to soak up consequences. I closed her thread without responding and tapped on Morin's name. Mom's messages were longer. She forwarded the notice about the blocked house payment and added a paragraph about how close they had come to losing the place last time. She called the row house our home and the last thing we had left, as if I had not been the one holding it upright for years. Her final line said she understood I was upset, but reminded me that family does not walk away over one rude comment from a child. The unknown number turned out to be Philip. He sent fewer messages, but each one landed heavier. He told me I was being dramatic, that responsible adults did not play games with mortgages and coverage. He called my decision reckless. He never called it mine. I read every message once, then set the phone down and poured myself a glass of water. For the first time, I did not feel the pull to respond, not to explain, not to defend myself, not to offer some middle ground that would keep everyone else steady and leave me scrambling later. What I felt instead was the need to make sure every step I had taken would stand if anyone tried to challenge it. Rodri was the only person in my life who understood the shape of my finances. We had met when I started at the logistics company, back when I was still clearing student loans and grabbing extra shifts. He worked as a senior analyst in a different department and did consulting on the side, helping people unwind money they had twisted into knots. After listening to me explain yet another round of short-term help for my family, he had once asked me to put everything into a single folder. It was the closest anyone had ever come to telling me I was allowed to draw a line. I scrolled past the family threads and opened our last exchange. My fingers hung over the keyboard for a full minute before I typed a question. I summarized what I had done that night and asked whether those moves were enough to remove my name from places it never should have been and what else I needed to do to protect myself. I did not expect a response until morning. It came within minutes. He wrote that he could not give formal legal advice over text. But based on what I described, cutting off the drafts was the only way to force the other adults to take responsibility. He suggested I call my bank during business hours to place formal stop payments on anything still scheduled from my accounts and to request written confirmation. He told me to download every statement showing who had been paid and from where and to store copies somewhere my family had never accessed. At the end, he added one sentence that hit harder than any threat lighting up my family's phones. If anyone tried to accuse me of abandonment, the paper trail would show 10 years of the opposite. I read that line twice before locking my screen. The messages from across the city kept coming, stacking up in unseen threads. I left the phone face down on the table and sat by the window. Outside, the night between one year and the next finally felt quiet enough for me to hear my own thoughts. By late morning the next day, I picked a place where I could leave without anyone cornering me. It was a narrow diner on the edge of Center City, chipped counters and bottomless coffee, the kind of spot where people mostly kept to themselves. I chose a booth against the wall facing the door and cupped a mug in both hands until the heat soaked into them. Morin entered first, her eyes scanning the room like she expected bad news to be hanging over my head. Philip came in right after, jaw tight, coat half open. Desiree arrived last, still focused on her phone. Alana trailed at her side. They noticed me and moved as one toward the booth. A formation so familiar it stung to see. They slid into their places. Morin and Philip across from me, Desiree next to me, Alana on the outer edge where she could watch every face. For a moment, we let the clatter of dishes and the sizzle from the grill fill the space. Philip broke it first. He leaned in, elbows on the table, voice low and edged. He said it was time to stop whatever game I thought I was playing. Mortgages were not leverage. Autodrafts were not weapons. The house payment had bounced. The leasing company was already sending notices. And adults did not pull moves that put roofs and contracts at risk. He called what I did reckless. Morin twisted the laminated menu between her fingers. She said she had not slept, that the thought of losing the row house made her physically ill, that she did not recognize the version of me who could shut out her own parents over hurt feelings. She framed it as a burst of anger, not the end of a long pattern. Desiree skipped any attempt at softness. She went straight to the car. She reminded me the lease was in my name, that my signature was on every page, that if payments stopped, collections would come after me first. She said she needed that vehicle for Alana, that she would not be caught hauling her child around in something old and unreliable. The meaning beneath every word was identical. My role was to take the hit. I let them speak. I counted my breaths. I let each accusation land and pass through me. When they finally stopped, waiting for me to apologize or fold, I reached into my bag and placed a slim folder on the table. I turned it toward them and opened it. The first page showed the loan history for their house, a decade of transfers pulled from my account. Behind it were the lease statements for the crossover. Every payment stamped successful until the one that stopped after I revoked the authorization. After that came summary pages from my health plan listing dependents and premiums, invoices from the after-school program and phone bills for the family plan. Each device tagged with a name. No one reached for anything. Morin stared at the columns. Philip stared at the dates. Desiree stared only at the lease line where the most recent charge had failed. "This is what I have been doing," I said. "Not one favor. Not once in a while. For years." Philip's eyes moved slowly down the page. He asked why I had never told them the total, why I had kept them in the dark if it was so heavy. It was the first time he acknowledged there was a total at all. Morin's face folded in on itself as she saw how far back the statements went. She started to say she would have helped if she had understood, then stopped when the words ran into the proof in front of her. Desiree did not look away from the car statements. She said that if I cared about Alana, I would fix that line first and we could sort out the rest later. Her focus stayed exactly where it always had been, on the thing that made her look successful. Alana had been quiet, hunched over a kid's menu with a stub of crayon. When she heard her name, she looked up, eyes moving from the folder to her mother and then to me. "I thought you liked paying for stuff," she said in the flat voice kids use when they repeat a fact. "Mom says you always will because you do not really have your own family." The air at the table shifted. Desiree froze. Morin's hand flew to her mouth. Philip looked at the girl like she had just read out a verdict. I kept my eyes on Desiree. Then I said that is why the payment stopped. I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag and stepped out of the booth. No one moved to follow as I walked past the counter and into the winter light. 2 days after the diner, the first real answers arrived in other people's envelopes. Bank logos framed the edges of crisp white pages. My parents' names showed up as borrowers, my sister's as the customer, and mine on the line for the account that had been propping up their balances. For the first time, the system was speaking to them instead of treating me like the only grown-up in the room. The notice on the house loan was direct. A scheduled draft had bounced. A fee would apply if no transfer came in during the grace period, and if the account slipped further, the lender would reach out to the borrowers to talk through next steps. I had read that wording years earlier when I agreed to help. What had changed was my willingness to let those sentences land where they actually belonged. My phone responded before they did. Desiree's texts came fast and furious. Long chains of blame and demands. She said I was trying to blow up her life over one bad moment, that she needed the car for Alana, that I had ruined everything with the loan, the plan, the club. In her mind, every fix looked the same. I would call, smooth it over and say sorry. Morin's messages arrived more slowly but carried more weight. She talked about how close she and Philip had been to losing the row house, how she had finally slept once she believed the loan was secure, how she no longer recognized the daughter who could watch her parents slide backward. Beneath it all sat the same belief. A good child would step back into the flames. Philip wrote the least. His texts were short and firm, centered on obligation and pride. Adults honored commitments. I had signed my name, so the responsibility was mine. Pulling out now was selfish. He did not mention that every signature had followed a crisis he and Morin could not untangle on their own. I did not match their tone. When they said I was wrecking their credit, I replied that I had spent over a decade shielding it and that it was their turn to speak directly with their lenders. When they warned collectors would come after me, I answered that I was saving copies of every transfer notice and statement, enough to show anyone exactly who had been carrying whom. During business hours, I worked through the list Rodri had helped me put together. I called my bank and waded through holds and handoffs until I reached someone who could place stop payments on drafts tied to family accounts. I asked for written confirmation for each change and saved the files alongside the statements already stored on my laptop. The pile of paperwork grew quickly. Next, I called the leasing company. I told the representative that even though my name was on the contract, the vehicle was in my sister's possession and that any future coordination needed to go through her. They flagged the account and read back the remaining term. I noted the time, date, and their name and slid that page into the same folder. For the house loan, I told the servicer that the account they had been drafting from would no longer be available. The person on the line calmly listed the outcomes of missed payments, late fees, default, and the possibility of stronger action. I said I understood. For once, the next move would not be mine. After those major accounts, smaller threads began to loosen too. The after-school program sent a polite notice that Alana's tuition was past due and that her spot in the coding club would be paused if the balance stayed open. My benefits portal quietly showed the next window when I could remove my parents as dependents and noted in small text that they could remain covered if they chose to pay the full premium themselves. The phone carrier confirmed that at the end of the billing cycle, my account would drop to a single line in my name and every other device would need its own plan. None of these shifts were explosive on their own, but together they marked the start of a life where my support was no longer automatic. As the days passed, my family's tone changed without ever settling into anything honest. Desiree's anger thinned as she fielded calls from lenders. Maureen moved between asking for a little more time and promising again that she would eventually repay me. Philip warned that I would regret this when I was older and needed the very people I was pushing away. Most nights, I made something basic for dinner, left my phone on the counter, and only opened messages from institutions asking me to approve the final steps of separating my accounts. Each time I confirmed a change, my world tightened by a small, exact amount, not into emptiness, but into a form that finally felt like my own life. As winter faded, my days settled into a rhythm that no longer curved around other people's crises. The last confirmations came in quietly. One email explained that my parents' coverage would continue only if they chose to pay the full premium themselves. Another confirmed the family phone plan had been reduced to a single line under my name. A notice from the after-school program stated the account linked to my card had been closed and any future enrollment would require a new payer. None of these messages felt dramatic. They read like receipts for decisions I had already made privately. My phone shifted too. The constant flow of messages from my family slowed to a trickle and then stopped completely. A few final attempts came through from unfamiliar numbers. A photo of the row house looking more worn than I remembered. A snapshot of a bus stop where Desiree stood with Alana. A picture of a stack of letters from lenders spread across my parents' kitchen table. I did not respond. I did not zoom in. I let each image move through the same quiet that had followed me home from that New Year's brunch. My days became simple in a way that felt almost suspicious at first. I went to work, came home to a place where no one else had a key, cooked what I wanted, watched whatever I liked on services I actually used. When money left my accounts, it did so for bills that matched the life in front of me. No other addresses appeared on my statements. No other names rode on my credit. The folder I had shown at the diner now sat in the bottom drawer of my desk, paired with a backup drive holding the same records. I kept it not because I planned to confront anyone, but because I finally understood that protecting myself was not the same as attacking my family. It was simply refusing to disappear into the version of events they preferred. Word reached me later in small sideways ways. A former neighbor told me my parents had finally gone to the bank themselves and were trying to refinance based on what they actually earned. Someone from Desiree's old social circle mentioned she was driving an older sedan now, one she could handle without anyone else's name attached. Alana had transferred to the public school down the block, and according to the same chatter, she was doing just fine. None of it pulled me back. The goal had never been to punish them and then return once they adjusted. The goal was to leave a role that had been consuming me and to remain outside of it, even if they eventually understood what it had taken. On a cool evening a few months later, I stood in my kitchen with the window cracked, listening to traffic hum along the street below. The apartment smelled like roasted vegetables and clean soap. My phone rested on the counter face up, free of red alerts asking for my attention. For the first time I could remember, I could explain my life without opening with someone else's name. I thought about Alana's voice in the diner, repeating what she had heard at home like it was truth. I thought about every time I had convinced myself that being useful meant being loved, that carrying everything quietly made me strong instead of unseen. I thought about how easily my own mother had erased me from the family with a single message, certain I would keep paying while standing on the outside. What I finally understood was this. Money does not purchase love, but the way people handle your sacrifices shows you exactly how they define family. If your value only exists when you are fixing things, then you are not a relative to them. You are a resource. Leaving that behind is not cruelty. It is clarity. If anyone watching this recognizes themselves in where I once stood, holding up everyone else's life while being called trash for it, I hope this gives you permission to look at the numbers and the behavior together. Ask yourself who would still claim you if your name disappeared from their paperwork. Then decide what family means to you, not just what it costs. Thank you for staying with me through the end. If this made you pause and rethink your own boundaries, pass it along to someone who might need the same nudge.